A visit to the Scott Plantation settlement in Scott, Arkansas is really a visit back in time. Here homes, farm buildings, equipment, and an entire way of life are preserved to teach us about our own past, that of our community and country, and how we came to live as we do today. The Scott Plantation settlement shows us life on a typical Arkansas plantation starting in the mid-1800s. The area was known as Ashley's Mills and was the site of a Civil War battle. A marker stands to honor and memorialize those who fought and died here. The land was once part of the Arthur Alexander Plantation, known as Ilali, one of many similar plantations around Scott. Most of the buildings you'll visit here were moved from other nearby plantations to create an overall view of what local plantation life was like. Although some of the buildings date back to the 1840s, the period represented by the Scott Plantation settlement is generally from 1840 to the mid-1940s. A plantation was basically a farm that grew one or more crops, such as cotton, rice, hay, and timber. Farming was very difficult work, using only simple tools to tend hundreds of hard dirt acres. A wealthy family owned the plantation and used additional workers to raise and harvest the crops. The time represented by the Scott Plantation settlement includes the period before and after slavery. After the Civil War, both black and white tenant farmers became known as sharecroppers. They were called sharecroppers because they worked in and around the fields for a small share of the profits that were made from the sale of the crops at the end of the growing season. In exchange for their labor, they were also given a place to live and some other basic necessities such as early schooling for their children and medical care. In spite of this arrangement, they were very poor, and most had no choice but to stay and work on the plantation from kin to can't, which meant from can see to can't see. The plantation bell was used to wake the workers. Life was hard for these tenant farmers. Let's take a look at some of the buildings you'll explore when you visit. We'll also show you some items they used every day. See if you can guess what they were for. The family that owned the plantation lived quite well for the times. The main family house was also known as the Big House. This one was built in the 1880s. As you can see, it was quite spacious and luxurious. It even had an organ for family entertainment. The dim light of coal oil lanterns could be seen glowing in the windows of the tenant houses. Even by 1950, only about half of the farms had electricity. Do you recognize what this is? Here's a hint. Today, people carry a much smaller version with them most of the time. Here is a kitchen and pantry area which was ruled over by the cook. The cook was a very valued employee and got to live in one of the nicer tenant houses known as the cook's house. Soft water, meaning water without harsh ground minerals, came from rain, was caught in gutter drains, passed through a charcoal filter, and stored underground in a tank or cistern well. The water was then brought up from the well by small buckets attached to a chain or by using this. Do you know what it is? During the early years of the house, there was no indoor bathroom. You could use a chamber pot, which was kept next to the bed. Can you guess what the phrase, "getting up on the wrong side of the bed," meant? Your other choice was to go outside to a small building called an outhouse. Day, night, in the middle of the summer or the coldest night of winter, when you needed to go, this is where you went. This cook's house, which we mentioned earlier, is actually one from the 1940s, so it had electricity, hot and cold running water, and a commode. Here's another nice home located on the place. Not quite as fancy and luxurious as the Big House, but beautiful in its own way. This sturdy log cabin, also built around 1840, served many purposes over the years, including as a home for plantation overseers and as a business office. It is the last known building of its type in the Scott area. Now let's compare those homes with several of the sharecropper or tenant houses. We have several varieties of tenant houses you can tour. Most of the tenant houses were very small and primitive, and several generations of the family would often live together. Some houses had dirt floors. Of course, the early ones had no electricity, and cooking and heating was done by wood-burning stoves. The mattresses were filled with straw. Why do you think they put lids of kerosene under each leg? And why do you think they pasted newspapers on the wall? This tenant house from the 1940s is more modern and comfortable. It has electricity for the lights and porch. When factories in the north started to lure workers away from the farm by offering higher wages, plantation owners started building better tenant houses to try and keep their most valuable workers on the farm. Because plantations were often located in rural settings far from town and markets, each had its own store called a commissary, where the tenants could charge for items such as food, clothes, and other necessities. However, many charged more than they had earned by the end of the crop year and could not leave for other employment. It was in the owner's best interests to keep the tenants healthy enough to work in the fields. So many self-sufficient plantations had a small doctor's office or medical clinic used by a visiting doctor. Because of racial segregation, which kept white and black people separated, this clinic had 2 separate doors and waiting rooms, one for each race, even though they both led to the same examining room. The medical clinic at Scottl Plantation Settlement is an exact replica of the original, which was built in 1928. Look at some of that medical equipment. Ouch! Here's another very important building found on plantations: the blacksmith shop. Blacksmiths, who were skilled at making and fixing metal tools and implements, and farriers, who specialized in making and fitting horseshoes, worked here at the hot fire. An air pump called a bellows kept the fire hot. All blacksmith shops had large doors on 2 sides of the building. There are at least 2 reasons for this. Can you guess why? And here's a building that would be very interesting to every young person: the one-room schoolhouse. Until around the 1880s, many owners built their own schoolhouse for their children and perhaps the children of close neighbors. A tutor came several hours each day to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and some other basic educational skills. There were no separate grades, so children from about ages 6 to 10 or 11 were taught in the same class. The children of tenant farmers attended a separate school, but only in the winter. Can you guess why? The largest building on display is the Cotton Belt Railroad Depot. The depot was not actually a part of the plantation, of course, but it was located nearby and provided important railroad services to the Scott area from 1911 to the 1940s. Today it serves as the tour orientation center and gift shop. This is also where you can actually see how food was prepared and play the same games as kids played on the plantation. When you visit, there will be many other buildings and artifacts for you to explore and examine, such as this corn crib, which is considered one of the finest examples of 19th century log craftsmanship. Look for the year that's burned into the log exterior. It is believed that this building often held something very different from corn. Wait until you hear what it was. You will also see this horse or mule-drawn sorghum mill used to make molasses. This replica ice house could actually keep ice, milk, and food cold before the invention of refrigeration. The children's house was originally the Cottonwoods Plantation School. Later it was used to make hair tonic. The wash house, used for doing laundry and ironing. The smokehouse, where meats were preserved. The cotton pen. And the plantation office. Each one gives us fascinating clues about how people, rich, poor, and in between, lived and died on and around the plantation. You'll have a chance to see and feel what Arkansas and a little bit of America was really like, and to imagine what your life would have been like too. Come experience the Scottl Plantation Settlement for yourself. and spend a little time back in time.